my name is Stacy. Welcome to the Homeschool Global Summit. Today I have Cody McLain with me. He is the founder of Support Ninja, a multinational company that has over 600 people worldwide. He has founded 3 multi-million-dollar companies and is the host of the podcast Mind Hack that interviews different successful people about their mindset, their culture, and their practices to see how they overcome obstacles to be more successful in their life. Cody has written the book From Foster Care to Millionaire, and the reason why I have him on here today is to talk about what other possibilities there are without school. Because after starting his business at 15, Cody moved on to online schooling, and after the death of his parents at 17, he abandoned formal schooling altogether to focus on his business, and clearly that has been successful. So welcome, Cody. Thanks for being on the interview with me today.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so the first question I want to talk about is from that moment you quit school. So that's like the first thing that I want to address right away is that's pretty scary. And most people would think about that if they're thinking about their own children and, oh my gosh, you know, my child's decided to focus on their business. It's not that you were answering to anybody, but you decided to quit school. And from that moment forward, how did your learning change? Like, how did that impact you for your future?
Sure. So I would say I didn't have much of a choice because of the situation that I was in. Whereas my mother had died and I was 17, so I was trying to avoid foster care. And I had actually been through online homeschooling in the past, but then I went back to regular school because I found that I just wasn't able, without a parent that was really like on my shoulder, having me do the homework and trying to push me, is my attention was always towards the business, because before I even dropped out of school, I still had this business and I was still even going to regular high school while trying to run this business. But eventually, when I was trying to avoid foster care, and prior to her death, she actually allowed me to go back to online homeschooling, where you have less accountability than you would obviously have in a regular high school. So I was able to just go that route and then just kind of stop doing my work. You know, I don't think it was a single decision that, okay, I'm going to stop doing my work this day. But it was in part because I also knew if I actually went back to high school, I'd probably have been easily put into foster care. But
okay.
But in terms of that, I didn't miss school, because even when I was going to school, you know, earlier I had A's and B's. I still had a lot of trouble fitting in, but I was able to maintain a certain level. And this is prior to starting the business. But after I started the business is really where I put all my attention and focus. Really, it changed my priorities. And so at that point, I started caring less about school and more about the business. It was always about the business. And in that respect, I wasn't able to balance this home work versus school life. And it was something where I just decided to start doing the business. And the things I learned differently is the way that you learn things in school. You don't really remember most of what you actually end up learning, because you end up you never have to recall it. You never have to apply it. And one of the interesting things I found when I was running this business is I did not know programming. I did not know anything about business or marketing or SEO, none of that stuff. But all of that stuff were things that I learned over time, because I needed to learn those skills in order to achieve this particular goal or vision that I had. And when I'm running the business, everything, my passion, it's effectively like my hobby. You know, and if you love sports, if you love football or soccer, you end up spending a lot of time in those arenas, and you can watch a video about how to kick a ball, but in reality, you have to learn it by kicking the ball. And most of what I ended up learning about business was in practical sense when I needed to learn about it. And I would give you an example is I had to write a press release because I saw other businesses, and this was 10 years ago, were still writing press releases, and I saw that's probably what I should do. So I looked at an example of a press release, and then I saw the exact structure of, okay, they introduce the company at the very beginning, they have a quote from the owner. And so I was able to create my own press release that got syndicated and shared on a multitude of websites. And I didn't take a course on how to write a press release. I didn't go to marketing school. And all of that knowledge I was able to retain and then use almost immediately. And even when I had to learn how to design a website, I didn't go to a class and learning how to take HTML and CSS. And honestly, I've taken those classes and I honestly don't remember much of what I actually even learned. But all the little tiny things that I needed to learn while I was building the website, I went out and I Googled those, right? I looked on YouTube. I was able to find that knowledge and then immediately apply it. And in most of the circumstances, when you're running the business, you end up having to reapply that knowledge and add on to it. So you end up retaining that knowledge much more in a solid fashion than you do simply by cramming everything into your head, trying to remember, what the answers are to a specific question on a test, and then you instantly dump and you never recall the information again. So in terms of remembering information, that also comes back to active recall, where you're actually learning the information, but then immediately applying it.
Yeah. Okay. So that your podcast kind of addresses a lot of this idea, like mind hack is literally what it's talking about. And what you're describing is essentially self-directed learning. So there's a whole community of homeschoolers where all they do is self-directed learning. They allow the child to lead the interest and to focus on what they want to do so they can deep dive into it. So to me, it just sounds like it's almost like a self-created internship. And you get these arguments from people around, well, they need foundational skills. So, what level of foundational skill does one need in order to be able to make that kind of leap? Like, what are we looking for as parents to say, when do we back off and say, okay, just let them go and let them run down that path for a while, because that self-directed learning is going to build those foundational skills that we think they have to do with math worksheets or, reading a particular novel.
And the other thing I would actually add to that is going to school made me hate learning when I was actually going to school, because you're essentially being forced and told that you need to read this book, you need to study this, and it ends up making learning not enjoyable in many respects, unless you just enjoy knowledge for its own sake. Which I'm somebody who likes to learn knowledge and then only learn what I need to immediately apply to what I'm doing. Only learn the answers to the questions that are going to be on the test, not the entire topic, because to me that would otherwise seem like a waste of time. But it took a long time, even after dropping out of school, before I started reading books. But it was at a certain point when I realized that if I wanted to be a successful person, I needed to read, I needed to exercise and do all those things that successful people do. And it was very hard. I got a Kindle, and it took me about a year before I started to create this formal habit of reading that on a regular basis. And eventually, after I started reading just on my own accord, eventually I saw the value in learning on my own. And now it makes a habit. It's created this habit where I'm always reading and I'm always learning. But again, it took a long time to get over that, because I've met other kids who just absolutely hate reading. Like, who reads a book anymore? It's hard. It's rare that I honestly ask somebody, what do they do for fun or a hobby? And they say that they read.
Yeah. Well, and the point is the forcing, right? So I've got 3 very different kids in my house. 2 of them are really digital. They actually read online. So they would read blogs, or they even read their books online. But then I've got one who reads chapter books in his bed, and he's just, obsessed with reading. I think the key to what you've said there is that when someone tells you have to do it, there's no internal motivation to do it anymore. Right. So I think you kind of, sort of nailed that on the head. So if you were going to go to future self, you've got kids, and you were to map an educational experience, because we're talking about those foundational skills, and everybody needs to learn to read and write and do math and all that kind of stuff. And you have no concept of homeschooling, because that's not, other than the fact that you kind of did online learning, but doing it as a whole life experience. There are probably a few key things that you've done in your life that you would like to see or would think that kids need to do. Like mine is, I think they need to do hard things, go outside their comfort zone. You've learned way more things than just hosting websites. Like, what are all the other pursuits that you've done? And what do you get out of learning something new that we can tell parents we need to give kids opportunities to do that?
Sure. So when I was growing up, I always had I would actually want it to, as a way to de-stress, I would actually open up Microsoft Flight Simulator and I would fly like a Boeing 737 and just land the planes, because I find when you're landing a plane, even if it's virtual, you put all of your attention and focus towards that task. And it becomes and what I would describe as a flow moment, where you're just totally engaged in that. And it's not too hard, but it's not too easy. And yet you have to put your full attention towards that. And I always told myself when I would be flying that game that I was never smart enough. I was never good enough to even fly an actual plane. But over this period of time, when I started reading, I actually noticed that my own self-esteem was really low. And that this was actually from going to school, because personally, I just didn't fit in. I never really enjoyed school. I never really fit in or had a social clique. And so I always had low self-esteem. I know that there's kids everywhere that are constantly growing up with this low self-esteem. And so my first breakthrough was having to fight through that own self-esteem, to get outside my comfort zone, to try new things. But one of the things I did, I eventually started learning how to fly a plane. I got a pilot's license. And then when I was going through that process, I realized like, wow, I actually once told myself I was too stupid to even be able to do this. I thought it was like just out of my league of intelligence. And believe it or not, for the longest time, I thought I was stupid and capable. And, that view is obviously different depending on the circumstance. And now I see that's not entirely the case. I also decided to challenge myself and learn scuba diving. And I got all these different scuba diving certifications, rescue, wreck diving. I also did Uber driving for a while, even though I didn't need to. It was an experiment, to get outside my comfort zone, to try something new. And then I also started writing. I never thought I could write well. And I always did a little bit better than average in, say, English or grammar class, but I wasn't stellar. I wasn't in any of the AP classes. And writing today is still kind of a chore, but whenever you complete that work and you publish it, then you're incredibly proud of that. And so everything from writing, I also learned photography. So I got a DSLR camera, and then I went on Groupon and I saw that there was this really nice looking hotel in Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. And I had no idea what the country was like, and I booked it. I went there by myself, didn't even know Spanish, but even the knowing that I'm traveling to a Spanish-speaking country, I significantly increased the amount of language learning in Spanish that I was doing up to the months, because I had a goal in mind. And it's also interesting to look at the moments when I didn't have any particular need to know Spanish. It lacks the motivation. It's like, why? And if you can have a goal of like, oh, I'm traveling to a Spanish-speaking country, I'm going to Mexico in July or something, then your motivation to learn something is there. And so I learned photography and started traveling, and all these things, believe it or not, I once thought I just was incapable of doing. And so these are passions that in some ways I discovered on my own, but I also had to go inwards and also consider, am I really stupid? And it turns out I'm not. And I think there's a self-esteem aspect to it. And then, I was just able to find my own passions. And I think these passions are within all of us, but sometimes we're so busy in what we're doing. And for me, it was actually running the business. For a lot of these, I didn't even discover them after I sold the business. And I think the same is some cases true with school, because you're so focused on schoolwork that you don't really have time to ask yourself, what are your true interests and passions and hobbies? And I know one exercise that a lady teaches is actually was mentioned on a Tim Ferriss podcast, is that she teaches a course on how to connect with your inner self, but that's going off topic. But you essentially write in a journal every single day of like, what do you want to do? And eventually after like 60 days, what is the one thing that keeps popping up? And actually it was the author of Eat, Pray, Love who did this exercise. And then she said she wanted to learn Italian. And that's what she put her pursuit at. But that's a different topic in terms of how to understand what your passions are in the first place.
I love that book. So I get that. I understand what that is. Okay. So there was a lot in there. So I'm just, I want to round the end of the conversation out about this idea of goal setting and time. So when we have kids in a structured environment, when we talk about raising our kids and we want them to see what you've seen without actually forcing them. I was the same as you. I wasn't a heavy reader, and I didn't read my first book until I was like close to 17. But it wasn't until I was in my 40s that I really dove into reading, you know, to the point where I'm reading 6 to 8 books a week and consuming them, or I consume them quickly in audiobooks because I want the information in my head. But if we're going to say, how do you set up, you know, teens, like tweens and teens in particular, to be able to explore this idea of self-directed learning, or the idea of finding that sort of passion? I love the goal, or the setting up some sort of a deadline. Like nothing moves the needle like a deadline. So you're going to go to Guatemala, and now you have no choice, but you need to learn Spanish. Is that, how can we put that into a concept that we can say to parents, we need to set up this goal setting scenario so that the self-driven learning just occurs naturally? Like, do you have any ideas around that? Like, how do we support people with that?
So it's difficult because you don't want to push them too much, because then then they feel like that it's an external motivation. And there's something called self-determination theory about whether you're doing something based on external or intrinsic reasons. So like external being you have to get an A on the test, or you have to study for the test. Being internal being something that you're naturally inclined to want to do. And no matter what you're learning, there's always this learning curve. And there's so many different ratios and different types of graphs and models about how learning actually works. But I know a lot of the hard work is upfront. And I think the same is with procrastination. Anytime you procrastinate, it's really that tip of the iceberg, the very 10% upfront. If you can just get over that initial hump, then it becomes a lot easier. And when you're ending up learning something, even if it's something that you had a passion in, you're always going to hit this plateau of sorts. And I think that's where parents and other people can actually play a role, is that you can help bridge that gap. You can help them think, okay, what is a goal I could set for myself? What is the minimally viable amount of learning I could do with this? Maybe as a parent, if they're interested in a particular skill, you can try and find different actual laid out courses. And I know there's another program that does something like that, where they have mentors, and then the kids would actually take Udemy or other various online classes. And having that coach can really help. I know that I'm using the service called Future.fit, and I've been working out from home for a long time, but it's a service that allows you to have a virtual coach, and then he gives me a workout every single day. And even though it's virtual, even though if I didn't do a workout, they're not going to tell me anything bad because they don't want me to terminate the service. But just having a coach, somebody that is able to tell me, like, based on my goals, what I should be doing, that is significant, because I feel like this is a path, and I can just follow this path, and in knowing that after a certain amount of time, I'll make progress. And the same is true with anything. To maintain that internal intrinsic motivation, you also need to feel like you're making progress. And so most of the things that I've learned is that you have these static courses where they just teach you skills. And I think that the best case scenario of these courses are the ones where you actually follow along, or in some cases, a parent, say if the child is learning Python or web design or something along that nature, is ask them before they start taking these classes, do they want to build? Maybe they want to build their own website. I think that's a perfect project for any kid, is to build your own website, not to go to any of the any of the online website builders that you just click and drag, but as like a basic project of like building something that they can look at and they can say, I made this. It's sort of like that thing you can put on the wall that's an achievement that you can look at and be proud of that. And so I think there's various stages of those learning. You have to be supportive, but not too pushy, and help them prioritize, set goals, create a structure for the learning, but also try and tie that in with those intrinsic goals of how can they immediately apply this information to something that they're doing, whether it's a business that they want to start, or whether it's just something basic like building a software program or a website.
I love that. That's perfect. Thank you very much, Cody. I'm going to end on that because that's like some of the best advice I've heard in a long time, actually. Thank you so much for being with me, and thank you for joining us on this summit. I really appreciate it. And if anybody wants to check out his book, From Foster Care to Millionaire, I highly recommend it. I read it in one sitting. It was an excellent read. So thanks very much.